Welcome to the Corval Group Training Module for Welding Fume Control. The purpose of this training is to increase a worker's ability to identify, avoid, and control hazards associated with welding fumes. Welders, their helpers, and others in the work area have the potential of being impacted or affected by welding fumes. In this module, we will discuss types of welding. We will examine the makeup of the weld fume along with the potential for exposure, possible adverse health effects, as well as means and method to reduce exposures, and the worker's right to know about chemicals that you may be exposed to in the work environment. Welding is a process that causes fusion to join materials together. For the purpose of this training, we will focus on the hazards of joining materials. The cutting of materials with oxygen-enriched fuels or plasma cutting, as well as brazing and soldering, have the potential of producing a hazardous fume as well. What is welding fume? Simply stated, weld fume is the smoke that is produced when welding. The smoke contains metal and gas byproducts that have the potential for unhealthy consequences. A good question to ask when assessing the hazards associated with weld fume is, what's in it? The fume, in all cases, will contain metal particles of one kind or another. The potential exists for various metals based on the material being welded, type of rod being used, as well as compounds found in any paint or other materials that may be left on the base material. In addition to the metals contained in the fumes, there are gases as well. Shielding gases are components of some types of welding activities and materials. As the name suggests, the shielding gas shields the solidifying molten weld from oxygenation, as well as impurities and moisture in the air, which may weaken the corrosion tolerance of the weld, generate porous results, and weaken the durability of the weld by changing the geometrical features of the joint. Even though many of the gases used are non-toxic, they can displace oxygen in your breathing air. This could cause dizziness, unconsciousness, and possibly death. Process gases are gases that may be produced as a result of the welding activities, including carbon monoxide. The degree and level of exposure to workers can be affected by a number of factors. These include the type of welding process, the materials being used, the composition or makeup of the welding rod, and where the welding is taking place. Are you outside in the open air with good natural ventilation or in an enclosed space? Work practices can have a great impact on worker exposure. The health effects of exposure to weld fumes can range from acute, short-term exposure symptoms consisting of irritation of the eyes, nose, or throat, to chronic, long-term exposures that result in impacts to our health in a more serious nature. Should you experience eye, nose, or throat irritation, leave the area and notify your supervisor immediately. When welding on galvanized or zinc materials, a welder can experience what has become known as metal fume fever within just a few hours of welding activity. Metal fume fever, MFF, has nonspecific symptoms, but is generally flu-like. Symptoms may include sore throat, fever, chills, nausea, headache, fatigue, muscle ache, and joint pain. A sweet metallic taste in the mouth that distorts the sense of taste is commonly reported. If you've been welding on zinc or galvanized materials and experienced the above, notify your supervisor immediately. Inhalation of toxins has the potential of poisoning our whole body. As a result of long-term exposures, cases of stomach ulcers or damage to your liver, kidney, central nervous system, and lungs, an assortment of cancers have all been documented. In addition, long-term exposure to certain fumes have been shown to cause Parkinson's-like symptoms. Gases such as helium, argon, and carbon dioxide will displace oxygen and potentially lead to suffocation. Carbon monoxide gas can form as a result of the processes and pose an asphyxiation hazard. Should you be welding on stainless steel or other non-ferrous metals such as chrome or galvanized, ask your supervisor or safety rep to complete the just-in-time training module for hex chrome. It used to be said that you never see an old welder. Fortunately, today's welders are much more informed of the hazards associated with weld fume and are positioned to perform their work in a way that can and will greatly reduce their exposure with ventilation, respirators, design of welding hoods, and body positioning. How can you reduce your exposure? There are a number of things that can be done to reduce your exposure to weld fume. Make sure that the welding surfaces are free of any paints or solvent residue. Pay attention to your body position. Identify the flow of the fume and stand upwind when possible. Use general ventilation to move the fume away, thereby reducing your exposure, or by wearing a respirator. Local exhaust ventilation can be useful in drawing fumes away and discharging them at a safe distance away. When using local exhaust, make sure that fumes are not being discharged on others. Ventilation equipment is available through the Corval Group tool and equipment centers. It may be possible to select a different rod that generates fewer and less toxic fumes. This is not always possible, as rod type is often specified and substitutions may not be allowed. Typically, it doesn't hurt to ask. Never perform welding of any kind in a confined space without ventilation. If welding is to be performed in a confined space, a permit will be required and confined space training will need to be provided for all entrants, supervisors, and attendants. In the event that work practices and ventilation are not sufficient to reduce exposure to acceptable levels, respiratory protection may be required. Should respirators be necessary, all workers that wear a respirator must be medically cleared to do so, have respiratory training provided, and be fit tested for the respirator that they will be wearing. Worksite conditions, especially in construction, are usually fluid. That is to say that they're constantly changing. As a component of our task hazard analysis, we can ask ourselves what-if questions. What if I'm supposed to engage in welding activities and have no ventilation? What if the air is not moving from natural ventilation to move weld fumes away from my breathing zone? What if there still is paint on the pieces I'm welding? What do you do when you're faced with situations that you believe do not provide adequate safety measures? The answer is stop. Please listen carefully to the following message. All employees and subcontractors are empowered, authorized, and obligated by the owners, president, and leadership of Corval Group to stop work at any time for any unsafe condition. All employees and subcontractors are expected to stop working until the hazard or risk has been resolved. The stop work authority can be difficult for employees to embrace because of the fear of losing their job. Be assured that no employee will ever be penalized for using stop work authority. Right to know. All workers who are or may be exposed to the hazards of weld fumes have a right to know what hazardous materials or components may be in the air that they breathe in the workplace. Corval Group has subscribed to a third-party service called SDS Online. All Corval Group computers and phones are set up with a direct link that allow immediate access to safety data sheets, SDS. SDSs are commonly known to be available for what we think of as chemicals. But SDS are also required for things like welding rod, grinding, and cut-off wheels, as these items have the potential for putting respirable particles in the air. This sign can be found on Corval Group job sites and provides all necessary information to obtain any desired safety data sheet. The SDS will provide information relative to the makeup of the product, health hazards, and control measures. You can ask your foreman for the SDS or search the database yourself. Signs are a great way to provide necessary information in the workplace. However, the sign may not always be where you are. Having the SDSs readily available on Corval Group computers and phones is a great benefit. But what if you're not near a Corval Group phone or computer? In the event of an emergency involving chemical exposure, the number to be called can also be found on your THA, which should be in the possession of someone in your work group at all times. The WSSA poster and painted or stickered to your hard hat. As with any injury or safety hazard, contact your supervisor and inform them of any chemical exposures. This table provides an overview of the organs and body systems that are affected by exposure to toxins found in various chemical elements, to which welders are typically exposed. Please note that this table is intended for informational purposes only and should not be used to aid in any diagnosis of health-related issues as a result of exposure to weld fumes. With proper ventilation, body positioning, and respiratory protection, we can work safely with these types of metals. In summary, to ensure your safety and health, as well as the safety and health of your coworkers, always identify the flow of weld fumes and make sure that they are not being breathed. Identify the hazards on your task hazard analysis, THA, and work with your supervisor to ensure that the work is being performed in the safest manner possible. Thank you for participating in this Corval Group Welding Fumes training module. Remember that no training can possibly identify all tools, tasks, or hazards that we encounter. Always remember how important your role is in identifying hazards. Always take the time to plan your work and analyze the hazards associated with each task. If you have any questions, contact your supervisor or safety representative.